The gym was already loud before the comment was made. Heavy bags thudded against chains, jump ropes snapped against concrete, and the sharp rhythm of fists meeting pads echoed off the walls. It was late afternoon, sometime in the early 1970s, one of those sessions where serious fighters gathered not to show off, but to test themselves quietly among peers. Bruce Lee was there early, as usual, moving through his warm-up with deliberate calm, long before anyone thought of sparring. He wasn't drawing attention. No crowd, no demonstration. Just Bruce, shirt off, skin slick with sweat, moving through footwork drills, shadow boxing in tight arcs, stopping mid-motion to adjust angles that only he seemed to notice. His movements were compact, almost restrained, like a coiled spring refusing to waste energy. To someone who didn't understand what they were watching, it looked underwhelming. That was when the famous fighter arrived. He was known, well known, the kind of name that carried weight the moment it entered a room. Tall, confident, built like someone who had never doubted his place among elite competitors. He had wins, reputation, stories that followed him from gym to gym. People straightened when he walked in. Conversations shifted, eyes tracked him. Respect was automatic. He watched Bruce for a few minutes without saying anything. Arms crossed, expression unreadable. Bruce didn't acknowledge him. He kept moving, breathing steady, eyes focused inward, refining motion rather than performing it. The contrast was sharp. One man carrying his reputation loudly without a word, the other moving as if reputation didn't exist at all. Then the comment came. Not shouted, not aggressive, just loud enough to be heard. "Is that it?" the fighter said with a faint smirk. "I've fought guys way better than this." The words hung in the air. The gym didn't explode. No arguments, no laughter. Something else happened instead. The sound level dropped, like someone had slowly turned a dial. Bags stopped swinging, ropes slowed. Even the background music felt quieter. Everyone understood what that comment was. Not an insult meant to start a fight, but a dismissal, the kind that challenges a man's legitimacy in front of witnesses. Bruce stopped moving. Not abruptly, not defensively. He simply came to rest, standing still, breathing controlled, eyes calm. He turned his head slowly toward the speaker, studying him the way one might study terrain rather than an opponent. No anger, no offense taken, just assessment. The famous fighter held his gaze, still confident, still amused, unaware that the room had already begun to change around him. Bruce spoke softly. "Show me!" And with that, the gym went completely quiet. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. There are many more Bruce Lee stories and lessons still waiting to be discovered. The famous fighter stepped forward slowly, not rushing, not posturing. He had the posture of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. This wasn't anger driving him. It was certainty. The certainty that size, record, and reputation always resolved questions like this one. Around them, the gym had transformed into a closed space, even though no one had said a word. People drifted back instinctively, creating room without being asked. No one wanted to interrupt what was clearly no longer a casual exchange. Bruce didn't change his stance. He didn't raise his hands or square his shoulders like someone preparing for a confrontation. He remained relaxed, weight evenly distributed, breathing steady, eyes focused but unfixed, not locked on the fighter's face, but aware of his entire frame. To those watching, it looked almost disrespectful, as if Bruce wasn't taking the situation seriously. In reality, he was doing the opposite. He was stripping it down to essentials. The fighter began to circle, light on his feet despite his size, testing distance. He threw a half feint with his shoulder, not meant to land, just to draw a reaction. Bruce didn't flinch. No blink, no shift. That alone caused a subtle change in the fighter's expression. He feinted again, this time adding a step, then another. Still nothing. Bruce was not reacting to motion, he was waiting for commitment. That hesitation was unfamiliar territory. Fighters like him were used to opponents responding early, telegraphing fear or intent. Bruce offered neither. His stillness wasn't passive, it was deliberate pressure, forcing the other man to act first, to reveal himself. Seconds stretched. The silence in the room grew heavier, no longer curiosity but tension. Finally, the fighter committed. A fast entry, aggressive, designed to overwhelm. He closed distance hard, throwing a strike meant to establish dominance immediately. Before the motion fully unfolded, Bruce moved, not backward, not away, but slightly offline, just enough. The strike passed where Bruce had been a moment earlier, cutting through empty space. And then the room understood something was wrong. Bruce didn't counter with force, he interrupted. A short movement, compact and precise, stopping just short of contact, close enough that the fighter froze mid-motion, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. No blow landed, no one fell. But the message was unmistakable. The exchange had already ended, even though it had barely begun. The famous fighter stepped back instinctively, confusion flashing across his face. Not fear, confusion. He had done everything correctly, and it hadn't mattered. Around them, no one spoke. The gym had gone beyond quiet now. It was waiting. Bruce didn't pursue. He reset calmly, returning to the same relaxed posture as before, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But nothing in the room was the same anymore. The famous fighter exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as if to reset more than his body. Pride hadn't cracked yet, but certainty had. He had felt something in that brief exchange. Not pain, not even threat, but displacement. The unsettling realization that control had slipped away without force being applied. Around them, the observers remained still, sensing that whatever happened next would decide the meaning of the moment. This time the fighter adjusted his approach. Less show, less rush. He narrowed his stance, lowered his center of gravity, and advanced with caution, eyes scanning Bruce's hands, hips, shoulders, searching for a tell. Bruce offered none. His posture didn't change, but his presence did. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the air in the room tightening. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was inviting. The fighter launched again, this time with a combination designed to force a reaction. A faint high, pressure forward, then a committed strike meant to trap Bruce against momentum. It was clean, technically sound, the kind of sequence that worked against trained opponents. But Bruce didn't respond to the sequence. He responded to the moment between movements, the fraction of a second where weight shifted and intention became unavoidable. Bruce stepped inside. Not fast in the way people describe speed, but early. His timing erased the attack before it could become dangerous. One hand redirected, the other made contact just long enough to establish control, and his footwork placed him at an angle where the fighter's structure collapsed inward on itself. No throw, no strike, just balance removed. The famous fighter stumbled half a step, catching himself before falling, his face registering surprise he couldn't hide. That was when the room truly went quiet. Not because something violent had happened, but because everyone understood what could have happened and didn't. Bruce had seen every opening and chosen not to take it. The restraint was louder than any impact. It wasn't mercy. It was certainty. He didn't need to finish the exchange to define it. The fighter straightened slowly, eyes locked on Bruce now, not mocking, not dismissive, measuring, reassessing. The hierarchy he had walked in with no longer applied. Reputation had dissolved under contact with reality, and what remained was a simple, uncomfortable truth. This wasn't about size, fame, or record. It was about understanding. Bruce relaxed again, hands at his sides, breathing unchanged. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't explained, hadn't defended himself. He had simply answered the question that had been asked of him the only way that mattered. And the answer had left no room for argument. The famous fighter took a step back, then another, not retreating so much as recalibrating his sense of distance, physical and psychological. The confidence he had entered with hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape. It was no longer loud or automatic. It was cautious, deliberate, the confidence of someone realizing that effort alone would not bridge the gap in front of him. He wiped his palms against his shorts, a small human gesture that revealed more than any words could. Around them, the gym had settled into a kind of suspended awareness. No one whispered, no one moved. The unspoken rule was clear. This moment belonged to the two men at its center. The observers weren't waiting for a knockout or a final exchange. They were watching something rarer, the quiet collapse of an assumption that size, reputation, and visible power dictated outcomes, that if you looked dangerous enough, you were dangerous enough. The fighter tried once more, but this time without theatrics. He entered carefully, testing Bruce's space inch by inch, probing with small movements meant to draw information. Bruce responded by giving him none. His feet adjusted subtly, always just outside the line of engagement, his torso angled in a way that denied clean access. It was like trying to grab smoke. Every time the fighter thought he had alignment, it dissolved. Then Bruce stepped forward, not as an attack, as punctuation. He closed distance calmly, occupying space the fighter thought was still his, placing himself where resistance would have been meaningless. His hand stopped short again, not touching, but close enough that the fighter felt the air shift against his skin. It was the same message as before, delivered with even greater clarity. You are already late. The fighter froze, breath caught halfway in, body locked by the realization that any continuation would be pretend. Bruce stepped back first. That mattered. He disengaged without ceremony, returning to neutral, signaling the exchange was over. No winner announced. No lesson spelled out. The fighter stood there for a moment longer, then nodded once, not publicly, not dramatically, but honestly. The nod wasn't submission. It was recognition. The gym slowly came back to life. Bags resumed their swing. Ropes slapped the floor again. Conversations restarted, but quieter now, altered. The famous fighter didn't linger. He gathered his things and left without another word, his presence no longer commanding attention the way it had before. Bruce returned to his warm-up. Same rhythm, same focus, same silence. But everyone who remained understood that they had just witnessed something that didn't need explanation. Strength had been redefined in front of them, not as dominance, but as control, not as size, but as timing, not as reputation, but as understanding. And that understanding would follow them long after the room stopped being quiet. What lingered after the fighter's departure was not excitement, but recalibration. People didn't talk about what they had seen so much as what they had felt, the shift in gravity inside the room, the moment where confidence changed owners without a punch ever landing. For many of them, this wasn't their first time around fighters, champions, or hard men who carried reputations like armor. But this was the first time they'd seen reputation dissolve without resistance. Bruce finished warming up and began moving through combinations alone. Slow and precise, each motion deliberate. There was no urgency in him, no need to capitalize on what had just happened. That, more than anything, unsettled the onlookers. He behaved as if nothing remarkable had occurred, as if moments like this were simply part of the process. Not milestones, not stories, just confirmations. A few fighters lingered near the edges, watching from a distance that felt newly respectful. Some tried to rationalize what they had witnessed. Speed, one thought. Timing, another. Reflexes. But none of those explanations fully accounted for what had happened. The truth was more uncomfortable. Bruce hadn't reacted faster. He had arrived earlier. He had already occupied the outcome before the exchange began. Later, one of the gym's regulars would describe it best. It felt like Bruce wasn't fighting people, he said. He was fighting assumptions, and every assumption lost. That was always the pattern. Wherever Bruce trained, wherever he worked, the same invisible friction emerged. People projected ideas onto him. Actor, lightweight, stylist, philosopher. And when those ideas collided with reality, the collision was silent but absolute. No bravado survived it. No excuses fit cleanly afterward. By the end of the session, the room had fully returned to normal. Sweat on the floor, chalk in the air, music humming faintly from a radio in the corner. But something had shifted permanently for those who were there. They trained differently afterward. They asked different questions. They paid attention to details they had ignored before. Balance, breath, positioning, restraint. Bruce gathered his things and left without drawing attention, just another man exiting a gym. But behind him, the room carried a new quiet. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of reconsideration. The kind that stays with you. The kind that forces you to confront what you thought you understood about strength, skill, and certainty. That was the real aftermath. Not applause, not acknowledgement, but a room full of fighters realizing that the loudest presence isn't always the most dangerous, and that true mastery rarely announces itself.